The morning it happened, the Virunga forest held its breath. Mist clung to the ancient fig trees like a shroud, and even the colobus monkey stayed silent, as if some invisible truth was about to rip through the heart of the mountain. Rangers had been tracking the Mukiza troop for weeks, waiting for the moment when Mara, one of the most resilient females in the group, would give birth again. 3 of her infants had died, one to illness, one to a fall, one to a predator. She carried those losses like invisible scars, and everyone whispered silently for just one thing, that this time fate would show mercy. But fate is rarely merciful in the wild. At 6:11 a.m., a call crackled through the ranger radios. Mara was in labor near the slopes of Mount Karasimbi. The team rushed toward the observation ridge, hearts pounding with hope. The forest floor smelled of damp roots and cold stone. The fog thickened until it swallowed the world whole, and then beneath a twisted acacia, the birth began. It lasted only minutes. The baby slid into the world, startled and silent, as all newborn gorillas do. But when Mara tore open the amniotic sac with her teeth, the silence deepened into something unnatural. The infant's fur wasn't black. It wasn't brown. It wasn't any color that belonged in the Virunga Mountains. It was white, startling, impossible, blindingly white, glowing like moonlight fallen onto earth. A collective gasp escaped the rangers, watching through binoculars. Albino gorillas weren't just rare, they were mythic. Only one had ever been documented in history decades ago in Barcelona, and now before their eyes, history had repeated itself. But the troop did not see a miracle. They saw a curse. Mara froze. Her dark eyes widened with a fear no mother should ever feel. She leaned in once, twice, sniffing him. The infant made a tiny sound, thin, pleading, reaching for her warmth, and Mara recoiled as if the baby had burned her. But Mara did not look back. As the hours passed, the rangers watched the infant's tiny body tremble in the mud. His pale skin reddened under the faint sun. His fingers clawed instinctively at leaves that offered no warmth. His cries grew quieter, thinner, almost like the forest was swallowing them before they escaped. Every detail carved itself into the memory of the men watching. At 11:49 a.m., a shadow moved at the ridge, a leopard. Its golden eyes locked onto the struggling infant. The rangers tensed. The cat took one step, two, then thunder cracked across the sky, a storm rolling in early, and the leopard vanished into the trees, startled by the sound. That single bolt of thunder saved the baby's life. A coincidence to some, a warning to others. A whisper of destiny to those who believed the forest had a spirit of its own. But storms passed quickly in Virunga. By mid-afternoon, the wind chilled, and the baby grew still. His breaths came shallow and uneven. The rangers exchanged looks, silent, terrified. They all knew what they were witnessing, the slow death of a miracle, the kind of tragedy that stains a ranger's memory forever. And yet beneath that despair, something else took root. Not one ranger could explain it, but each of them felt the same unsettling certainty: the infant wasn't meant to die here. There was too much story in his pink, frightened eyes, too much defiance in the fact that he was still breathing against all odds. At 4:02 p.m., the troop was confirmed to be miles away. Protocol shifted. Permission was granted. Chief Ranger Elias Mugenzi, a man shaped by 30 years of heartbreak, descended the ridge alone. The forest floor crackled beneath his boots. The rain began again, soaking through his coat. He moved slowly, palms open, whispering in Kinyarwanda as he approached the helpless creature. The infant's pink eyes met his, full of something beyond fear, a question perhaps, or a plea. Elias knelt in the mud. He wrapped the newborn in a thermal blanket. The tiny body shuddered once, then relaxed into his chest as if recognizing warmth for the first time. Elias whispered something he hadn't said to anyone in years, not since losing his own son in a rebel attack. "You're not dying today." And with that promise, soft, human, fragile, the entire future of the Virunga Mountains shifted. Because some births don't just bring life. Some births bring destiny. And this one would break the forest open. Elias carried the fragile infant through the rain-soaked forest with a weight in his arms that felt heavier than any living creature should. The baby barely moved, curled into the blanket like a flicker of life refusing to surrender. Every few steps, Elias pressed his ear close, terrified the faint breaths would stop. For 30 years, he had watched animals live and die, had buried creatures torn apart by poachers or drought, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this tiny being whose existence felt like a miracle wrapped in tragedy. By the time he reached the rescue outpost near Kanigi, the infant's skin had turned pale pink beneath the white fur, and his eyelids fluttered as if he were battling nightmares. The medical team moved quickly, warming him, hydrating him, trying to regulate his temperature. But even as tubes and warm blankets cocooned him, the reality became painfully clear. His albinism came with vulnerabilities far beyond abandonment. His skin blistered under even dim light. His eyes recoiled from brightness. His immune system seemed dangerously fragile, and the world itself felt too harsh for him. The staff whispered quietly, as if afraid their voices alone might break him. Elias named him Keone, meaning the one who sees far, because even in those early hours, the baby's pink eyes held a strange intelligence, a searching gaze, as if he were trying to understand why he had been brought into a world that rejected him on sight. The name felt hopeful, but the days that followed were anything but. Keone struggled from the beginning. He cried through the night's sharp, piercing sounds that echoed down the sterile rescue corridors. Elias slept beside him on a thin cot, holding him through each trembling fit. There were moments when Keone's breathing slowed so dramatically that every person in the room froze, waiting to see if his chest would rise again. When it did, they exhaled with relief, so profound it felt like grief. He grew quickly, as all gorillas do, but his body never hardened the way it should have. His skin tore easily. Small infections became dangerous rapidly. Fluorescent lights burned his retinas. The world was an unkind place for a creature born coated in snow. And yet Keone refused to disappear. He learned to crawl earlier than expected. He clung to Elias's shirt with fierce determination, pulling himself upright even when his legs trembled uncontrollably. When he took his first steps inside the dimly lit enclosure, he looked toward the mountain range where his family had vanished 3 months earlier. He reached a small hand toward the mist, as if trying to grasp the memory of a mother who had never held him. Elias felt his heart break a little each time. What haunted everyone the most was the silence that followed Keone's cries. In the early months, his sobs filled the outpost, nightly raw, primal grief from a child searching for a touch that would never come. But when those screams disappeared, replaced by blank stares and long hours sitting motionless against the wall, the team understood something darker had taken hold. Silence was worse than sorrow. Silence meant he was slipping away from the world, emotionally building walls no ranger's comfort could reach. Keone began tearing out patches of his own fur, first in small tufts, then in alarming handfuls. He scratched at his skin until blood appeared on his fingers. Elias often woke to find him curled in a corner, rocking slightly as though trying to hold himself together. Veterinarians diagnosed him with severe reactive depression, a condition rarely seen so intensely in young gorillas. Some murmured the unthinkable that euthanasia might be the most humane option. Elias refused to entertain it. He stood in front of the team, his voice cracking with anger, with fear, with love he hadn't realized had taken root so deeply. This child fought the forest to survive. He will not die here, not while I'm still breathing. The staff agreed to continue treatment, hiding human antidepressants in fruit paste, adjusting his environment, draping the enclosure in shadow to shelter his sensitive skin. Slowly, very slowly, small changes emerged. Keone reached for Elias again. He allowed the rangers to sit beside him without retreating. He showed curiosity toward enrichment objects, rolling them gently with the tips of his fingers. He touched his reflection in a blackened piece of metal, staring at his pink eyes with something like confusion, or perhaps wondering why he looked so different from the creatures in the mountain he still sensed through the wind. But emotionally, he walked a knife's edge. Whenever he heard distant gorilla vocalizations coming from the forest, he froze, completely staring out of the enclosure, as if paralyzed between hope and dread. He paced aggressively afterward, smashing fruit against the wall, pounding his chest weakly in frustration. Nights became particularly difficult. Elias found him sitting upright for hours, gazing at the narrow patch of sky visible through the vents. His breath trembled in a way that broke the ranger's heart. There was longing there, something ancient and irreparable. At 2 years old, Keone had grown into a striking creature, massive for his age, muscle layered across his pale frame, white fur shimmering in the dim enclosure light. People who saw him gasped. He looked like a king, carved from ivory, a myth walking on four limbs. But his eyes betrayed him. They were old eyes. Eyes carrying abandonment, confusion, grief. Eyes too young to have seen so much darkness. The attempt to reintroduce him to a peaceful nearby troop ended in disaster. Keone approached with cautious hope, chest low, vocalizing softly to show he meant no threat. The juveniles responded with curiosity, but when sunlight hit his pink eyes, fear exploded. A dominant male charged him. A female slashed his arm. The screams that tore from Keone as he fled echoed through the valley like a prophecy of failure. After they rescued him, Elias found Keone huddled on the concrete floor, shivering. That night he didn't eat, didn't vocalize, didn't move for hours. When Elias placed a hand on him, Keone leaned forward and wrapped his massive arms around the ranger's shoulders, pressing his face against him with a desperation that was almost suffocating. In that embrace, Elias understood something cruel and beautiful. Keone's heart hadn't died. It had weathered storms that should have destroyed him, and yet it still reached toward others. It still longed for connection. It still wanted a family. And in that longing lay his greatest strength and his deepest wound. For 3 years, the child who was never meant to survive refused to disappear, refused to surrender, refused to accept a world that had rejected him. And somewhere in the mountains, unseen through the fog, destiny was already moving toward him again. Long before anyone realized what was happening, the forest had begun calling Keone back. It began softly like a memory whispered through the leaves, a distant rumble of gorilla chest beats carried by the wind, a scent drifting through the morning mist, wild, earthy, familiar. Something inside him woke every time the breeze shifted, something instinctive and ancient, pulling him toward a destiny he had not forgotten, even if he had tried to bury it. Elias noticed the changes first. Keone no longer ignored the mountains beyond the enclosure. Instead, he watched them with a focus so sharp it seemed to cut through the fog itself. He moved differently too, less like a sheltered adolescent and more like a young silverback gathering strength. He spent hours grooming his own fur, smoothing the white strands, as though preparing for a ceremony only he understood. Some mornings, Elias found him perched on the highest boulder inside the fenced habitat, motionless, staring toward the forest as sunlight burned faintly against his sensitive skin. The pain didn't deter him. Nothing did. The rangers whispered about it. Keone was waiting for what no one knew. But every muscle in his body seemed tuned to some frequency humans could not hear. The shift became undeniable the morning a low resonant call echoed faintly across the valley. A guerrilla contact call far away, barely audible but unmistakable. Keone froze mid-step, head lifting, nostrils flaring. His entire body trembled. For a single breath, Elias saw something raw and heartbreaking in his eyes, hope fragile and desperate, and then just as quickly pain. Memories of rejection, of loneliness, of blood on the forest floor. His past and his longing collided inside him with such force that he staggered. After that morning, Keone stopped playing, stopped responding to enrichment toys, even stopped initiating the small affectionate gestures he'd slowly relearned. Instead, he paced, restless and uncontained. He dug at the soil near the gate. He pressed his ear against the wooden posts, listening. He vocalized soft grunts, low rumble sounds he hadn't made since infancy, sounds meant for mothers, for siblings, for families. Elias knew they all knew that something was coming, something no human could control. As summer unfolded across Rwanda, the Virunga Mountains were struck by a drought so merciless that animals began abandoning their territories in search of water. The rangers charted troop movements daily, their radios filled with grim updates. One morning, a trembling voice crackled through the troop that had abandoned Keone. His birth family had been photographed only 12 kilometers from the outpost. A week later, they were 9, then 7. Every report felt like a drumbeat of fate drawing closer. Elias watched Keone closely. Every time new photographs arrived, he saw recognition in the young albino gorilla's eyes. When shown the images, Keone leaned in, nose brushing the screen gently. He rumbled low and aching, as if calling to phantoms trapped behind the glass. He touched the picture of his mother, Maroja, with his fingertips tracing her outline. Then he looked toward the mountains again, the longing in him unbearable. That was when the outpost walls began to fail him. One night just after moonrise, Keone broke through the reinforced mesh of the tunnel enclosure. The metal was thick, designed to contain adolescent gorillas who could already bend steel, but Keone tore it apart as if driven by something greater than strength. The alarm blared as lights flooded the compound and rangers scrambled into vehicles. Elias raced ahead of them all, heart pounding, not with fear of Keone hurting someone, but fear of losing him forever. They found him 3 kilometers uphill beneath a giant fig tree, sitting perfectly still. He was facing the direction of his old troop's last known location. He did not acknowledge the lights or the approaching footsteps. He barely blinked. His chest rose and fell in slow, controlled breaths, like a warrior bracing for battle. Elias approached him gently, speaking softly, promising safety, promising he wasn't alone. For the first time since infancy, Keone did not look at him. His silence was a wound Elias had not expected, one that cut him in ways that no physical blow ever could. Keone was sedated and returned to the outpost, but the damage had been done. Not to the enclosure, though repairs took days, but to the quiet bond between the ranger and the gorilla. Elias felt it the moment Keone woke. The young gorilla kept distance, turning away from outstretched hands, refusing the fruit he once accepted easily. It was not rejection. It was something more painful: resignation. He was no longer fighting captivity. He was waiting for freedom or death, whichever came first. And then the forest began answering him. By early July, the Congo troop, now thin, weary, and crippled by drought, moved to within 5 kilometers of the outpost. Their alpha male limped. Their juveniles showed signs of malnutrition. Maroya, the mother who had abandoned Keone at birth, bore new scars. The troop was suffering but still moving with purpose, maybe with instinct, or perhaps with something else entirely. Every day the distance closed, Keone became more alert. He woke before dawn, pressing his face to the bars of the enclosure, inhaling the morning wind. He paced when the breeze shifted, chest swelling, as if tasting scents humans could not perceive. Elias began sleeping outside the enclosure, unwilling to leave him alone. Some nights Keone sat inches from him, divided only by metal, both staring at the same mountains for hours without a word. On a heavy, dust-filled morning in mid-July, Keone climbed the tallest artificial tree in the enclosure and stood upright, a posture he had never held so perfectly, so powerfully, so confidently. His white fur glowed in the harsh sun, shimmering like a flame rather than something fragile. His gaze locked on the ridge of the forest. He did not blink for 6 hours. Elias whispered, voice breaking, "You can feel them, can't you? You know they're close." Keone didn't move, but a deep rumble vibrated from his chest, a sound filled with longing and certainty. It was an answer. When the wind shifted that evening, carrying a faint, familiar scent with it, Keone made a soft sound that Elias had not heard since that first night 3 years ago, a tiny, trembling call, fragile and hopeful. It was the sound of a child calling for his mother. And somewhere in the forest, though no human heard it, the answer had already begun moving toward him. By the time July bled into its final week, the land itself felt ready to collapse. The drought had stripped the Virunga slopes bare, leaving the earth cracked and the rivers ghosted into silence. Birds no longer sang in the mornings. Even the wind, once lively, dragged itself across the valley like a dying creature. Everything seemed to be holding its breath, caught between desperation and the faintest thread of hope. And at the center of it all stood Keone, a white figure against the parched backdrop, waiting for something no one could name. Elias sensed the storm before it broke. Keone had stopped sleeping almost entirely. He paced until dawn, then perched on the boulder overlooking the mountains, unmoving for hours. His muscles trembled with restrained energy, with longing, with a pain too old and deep for any human to soothe. The other rangers watched from afar, whispering about destiny and instinct. But Elias knew it was simpler than that. Keone was reaching a breaking point. A soul could only stretch so far before something snapped. That moment came on a blistering afternoon when the air shimmered with heat and the outpost radios crackled to life. The Congo troop had been spotted only 3 kilometers away, moving slowly, collapsing from thirst, but still pressing forward. Maroja, Keone's mother, was limping heavily. Several of the juveniles had raw patches on their skin from dehydration. Their silverback Barongo staggered more than he walked, yet they kept coming. Elias felt something tighten inside him. It was happening. The forest was drawing broken things together, perhaps for healing, perhaps for catastrophe. No one knew which. 2 hours later, the miracle and the danger struck. Keone shattered the enclosure again. This time he didn't bend the metal. He tore through the reinforced gates as though they were vines. The Rangers had reinforced everything after his last escape, yet Keone's desperation had outgrown steel. Ilias heard the roar first, deep guttural, shaking the ground. By the time he sprinted out of the cabin, Keone was already on the hillside, his white fur glowing beneath the brutal sun. Keone Elias yelled, voice-breaking, but the young gorilla didn't turn. His strides were long, urgent, purposeful. He wasn't running wildly. He was following something. A scent, a sound, a memory. Something had finally reached him from the forest. Elias grabbed a tranquilizer kit and raced after him. The Rangers spread out in a coordinated sweep, but no dart could be fired yet. Keone was heading directly into steep terrain. A fall could kill him. Elias prayed out loud as he ran, though he hadn't prayed in years. They found Keone standing on a ridge chest, heaving eyes fixed on a clearing below. And there she was, Maroja. She stood alone at the edge of the clearing, trembling with exhaustion, ribs showing through fur matted with dust and scars. Her breathing was shallow. She glanced over her shoulder as though her own troop had fallen behind, unable to continue. When she lifted her head, her black eyes scanned the ridge where Keone stood. Elias watched the moment recognition struck her. Her entire posture shifted, her shoulders sagging, her mouth parting in a low, broken rumble. Keone responded with a sound Elias had never heard from him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't longing. It was the voice of an infant trapped inside a giant's body. A soft, heartbreaking call that seemed too small for something so strong. The sound of a child who had once begged not to be left alone. Maroja stepped forward, but her legs nearly gave out. She collapsed onto her forearms, head bowed to the dry earth. There was no dominance in the gesture, only surrender. It was an apology carved into dust. The moment felt impossible. The universe held its breath. Keone lowered himself slowly, as if unsure whether his own desire to approach would betray him. His hands shook as he touched the earth. Elias whispered, "Go, boy. Go to her." But destiny never arrives quietly. Before Keone could descend the slope, Virunga emerged from the brush, massive, despite his weakened frame. His silver fur, once brilliant, hung in dull patches. But his authority remained. He planted himself between Keone and Maroja and let out a warning roar. Keone froze. Elias felt his heart stop. If Virunga charged, Keone would defend himself instinctively, and one of them would die. Rangers raised their tranquilizer guns, waiting for Elias's signal, but he lifted his hand sharply. No shots, not yet. Any disturbance could trigger a fight to the death. Maroja dragged herself upright, chest heaving, and placed a trembling hand on Virunga's arm. She emitted a low, pleading whimper, a sound only mothers make when something in them is breaking. Virunga looked between her and Keone. His massive chest rose and fell. His eyelids fluttered. Then, for reasons no human could name, compassion, exhaustion, recognition of blood, he stepped aside. Elias swore he saw tears in the old silverback's eyes. Keone descended the slope. Each step was heavy with 3 years of abandonment, loneliness, confusion, and longing. His breath came in ragged bursts. Halfway down, his legs buckled, but he pulled himself forward. When he reached the clearing floor, he stopped 3 meters from Maroja. Maroja reached her hand toward him. Keone stumbled back, the old wound ripping open in his chest. He let out a roar filled with every night he had cried alone, every injury, every failed reintroduction, every unanswered call. It echoed across the valley like thunder. Maroja didn't move. She bowed her head lower, pressing her forehead against the earth. A mother breaking before her child. The forest vibrated with silence. Then Keone collapsed to his knees. His massive frame shook. His breathing turned into choked sounds, hardly vocalizations, not quite sobs. He crawled forward the last meter. Maroja lifted her head. Keone pressed his face into her chest. The world shattered and mended in the same breath. Maroja wrapped her arms around him, trembling with relief and agony. Keone let out a sound so raw, so grief-filled, that Elias felt it in his bones. The kind of sound that comes from the deepest part of a soul. The rest of the troop emerged one by one, thin, wounded, weary. None came forward aggressively. Instead, they formed a loose circle around mother and son, emitting soft vocalizations of acceptance, something no ranger had dared hope for. The impossible had happened. The child they abandoned was no longer a ghost. He was home. Elias lowered his tranquilizer gun, grounded by awe. He understood then that this moment was not orchestrated by humans, nor by strategy, nor even survival instinct alone. It was a miracle, one written not in books or biology reports, but in something far older, deeper, sacred. A miracle no one expected. The morning after Keone collapsed into his mother's arms, the forest seemed awake with a gentler breath, as though the mountains themselves understood that something sacred had occurred. Mist draped over the clearing like a veil, softening every edge, every shadow. It was a dawn unlike any Elias had ever witnessed in his decades in Virunga. A dawn shaped by forgiveness. Keone did not leave Marocha's side the entire night. They slept pressed together beneath a fig tree, his large white frame curled protectively around the mother who had once turned away from him. Maroja, weakened by drought and years of loss, rested her head on his chest and breathed in sync with the son she had mourned from afar, even when she could not face him. That morning, when the first light slid across the ground, they woke at the same moment, two beings tied together not by perfection, but by the courage to return. Elias watched from a distance, feeling a quiet ache settle behind his ribs. He had prepared himself for conflict, rejection, tragedy. He had never prepared for grace. It was not the reunion itself that stunned him. It was how seamlessly Keone folded himself back into the troop's rhythm, as though the forest had pressed resume on a story left unfinished for 3 long, painful years. But it was not immediate. Healing never is. Maroja approached him first, touching his shoulder lightly, almost reverently. Then she groomed him slowly, meticulously, pausing every few seconds to inhale his scent, as if confirming over and over that he was real. Keone leaned into her touch, eyelids fluttering, his breath trembling with the weight of acceptance he had waited years to receive. The troop watched hushed. Even Barongo, the old silverback, kept his distance, lowering his head each time Keone looked in his direction. Power was shifting. Everyone felt it, but no one challenged it. Not when they had witnessed a son forgive his mother without a word. A small figure approached next to Mina, the little juvenile born after Keone's abandonment. She had never known him except through the troop's fragmented memory, the white infant who cried in the rain, the ghost child who haunted the forest edges, the rumor of a creature too strange to belong. Curiosity glimmered in her dark eyes as she toddled toward him. Keone held perfectly still. She touched his arm first, then climbed onto his back as though he had carried her since birth. Keone closed his eyes and exhaled softly. Something in him shifted then, something deep and quiet, the kind of shift that turns sorrow into belonging. One by one, the rest of the troop came forward, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a low breath on his cheek, the respectful bow of a head. Each gesture rebuilt a bond once shattered. There was no ceremony in their acceptance, no grand declaration. Instead, there was something far more powerful: instinct choosing mercy over memory. By midday, Keone walked with them, truly with them, for the first time in his life. And as he moved, Elias saw what the forest must have seen all along. The white back that once marked him as a curse now glowed like a banner of protection at the troop's center. His shoulders were broader than Barongo's. His stride was steady and assured. He no longer carried the posture of something exiled. He walked as one who understood he belonged. The troop followed without hesitation. Maroja stayed at his side, touching him often, as though making up for every second of lost time. When they paused to rest beneath another dry fig tree, she leaned against him, humming the soft, rumbling melody mothers give only to their infants. Keone answered with a low vibration of his own, the first peaceful sound Elias had ever heard from him. Forgiveness had not only returned, it had remade him. As the day warmed, the troop reached a shallow spring that still held a pool of muddy water, a miracle in a season of loss. Barongo led them to drink, but it was Keone who guarded the edges, allowing the juveniles to drink first. The troop respected the unspoken shift. Barongo watched him with tired eyes, not threatened, but relieved. Leadership was passing with a dignity rarely seen among guerrillas. Elias recorded every detail, though he knew no footage could capture what was happening. Some stories were meant to be witnessed, not documented. This one lived in the breath between reconciliation and rebirth. When the sun began to set, staining the sky with a palette of copper and rose, the troop gathered in a circle at the edge of the clearing. It was nesting time. Maroja dragged branches toward the center, Amina chattering excitedly as she followed. Keone helped lift the heavier limbs, building a nest large enough for 3, his mother, his sister, and himself. Elias watched him settle into the nest of Mina, crawling onto his back again, Marohia curling against him like a mother who had never let go. Keone wrapped an arm around them, both his eyes half closed, his breath slow and content for the first time in years. The forest quieted, the wind softened, and something old, something sacred seemed to settle across the clearing. Forgiveness was not a moment, it was a homecoming. Elias wiped his eyes before the tears could fall onto his field notebook. He whispered into the fading light, "You did it, boy. You found your way back." But even he knew the truth. Keone had not simply found his way back. He had transformed the path behind him, turning pain into wisdom, exile into destiny, and abandonment into a future where a broken family could breathe again. The forest at last exhaled. In the end, when the forest finally quieted and the sun dipped behind the volcanic slopes, what remained was not just the story of a rare white gorilla, it was a story about all of us. A story about wounds we carry for years, about the people who fail us, about the broken places inside us we do not show, and above all, a story about the impossible, beautiful return of forgiveness. Keone's journey from abandoned infant to exile, to a young creature battling despair, to the moment he chose to run toward love rather than away from it, reveals truths that human hearts often forget. We imagine that healing comes quickly. We imagine that scars disappear, but the forest teaches otherwise. Healing is slow. Pain echoes for years. Forgiveness trembles before it finds its voice. And yet, when all hope seems lost, life has a way of circling back to the beginning, offering us one more chance to choose love. What happened between Keone and Maroha is something that transcends the boundaries of species. It is a reminder that even the ones who hurt us may carry their own guilt, their own secrets, their own reasons we will never fully understand. Maroha lived 3 years with the weight of abandoning her son. When she fell to her knees before him, she showed the world something rare, the courage to face the consequences of her mistakes. And when Keone ran into her arms, he showed something even rarer, the strength to forgive, not because the past was erased, but because the future deserves something better. That moment in the clearing, mother and son reunited, the troop encircling them in acceptance, is something the world desperately needs. In a time when so many hearts feel divided, when people carry silent grief and invisible battles, this story reminds us that reconciliation is still possible, that families can break and still find their way back, that the ones who feel most different, most lost, most misunderstood, may one day stand at the center of a community that once pushed them aside. Keone's life also teaches us that compassion saves more lives than strength ever will. Elias, who refused to give up on him, who carried him through the darkest nights, who sang to him and held him when he trembled, proved that one person's faith can alter the fate of another. Sometimes all we need is one person willing to say, "I won't leave you." And sometimes we are called to be that person for someone else. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is this: love does return. Sometimes it limps. Sometimes it arrives late. Sometimes it comes after years of silence. But when it returns, when forgiveness finally rises, it can heal wounds carved deep into the soul. So let this story stay with you long after the screen fades. Let it remind you that no one is too broken to be loved again, that no mistake is too heavy to be forgiven, and that even in the hardest seasons, life may be quietly preparing a reunion you never thought possible. If this journey moved you, if you felt your heartache break and heal alongside Keone, then I invite you to stay with us. There are more stories like this waiting to be told, stories that reveal the best in animals and the best in us. Stories of resilience, redemption, and the quiet miracles happening every day across our world. Please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and help us continue creating powerful, inspiring stories that honor the beauty of life and the compassion that connects us all. Your support means everything, and it gives us the strength to keep bringing these unforgettable stories to you. Thank you for watching, thank you for feeling, and thank you for believing that forgiveness always returns.